This disturbing CCTV footage from Pakistan shows the day a Christian church was attacked by ISIS bombers. Video from the streets of Kedah shows a seemingly normal scene at first, but after a few seconds, one of the people walking by pulls out a machine gun from under their clothes and goes running towards a nearby gate. Another person reveals that they are wearing a vest, and they take up a position inside while the other assailant climbs the fence to let them in. Not long after these two gained entry, they set off a bomb that killed at least 8 people and sent dozens more to the hospital. This footage from Chicago shows a homicide that occurred on Wabash Avenue back in 2020. The CCTV camera first picks up several groups of people walking across a boardwalk. It zooms in on 4 individuals who seem to stop when they reach the midpoint of the pedestrian bridge. The lights in the background indicate that the police are already in the area for some reason. After several minutes of walking back and forth, a man in a black t-shirt produces a weapon. Moments later, a second suspect produces a weapon as well. They both open fire at a target located off-screen, resulting in at least 1 death. Anyone who's ever worked in a coffee shop will tell you that you never know when a seemingly peaceful night is going to erupt into violence. This footage confirms this theory. At first, the group of customers is just sitting around talking. Suddenly, a man picks up a chair and hits another customer with it, before throwing both it and the table at them as well. Despite the chaos going on, an elderly person in the middle does an incredible job of protecting his coffee. However, even he has had enough by the time the entire restaurant is cleared. The 2020 explosion in Beirut, Lebanon is one of the most insane things ever caught on tape, and new footage from the event is still coming out today. This CCTV video caught a nanny and several kids getting caught up in the blast. At first, they simply seemed mesmerized by the blast.
Oh my God.
However, moments later, the shockwave hits, throwing glass and debris across the room. Though the children are all okay, at least one of them is hit very hard by a flying window, Even at that speed, it's shocking they had time to see the explosion before they felt it. Not being able to get a discount you think you deserve can be annoying, but this Domino's customer definitely took things too far. The older man on the right has asked the manager of this franchise location for a discount, but he doesn't have a coupon. Angered by the manager's response, he pulls out a gun and points it straight at the younger man's head. He eventually forces the man to his knees after 4 minutes of torment. Then he simply gives up and walks away. As it turns out, the gun wasn't loaded, but the poor manager had no way of knowing that. The fact that this occurred in Australia, where guns are hard to come by, makes it that much more perplexing. This chilling footage from Michigan shows a bodybuilder named Paul Bashy launching a vicious attack on his young girlfriend. Video from their rented home shows the man going through his girlfriend's phone. Several minutes later, the woman comes in and he immediately starts attacking her. He uses a variety of different items to harm the woman over the course of the 40 minutes, even stabbing her several times with multiple knives. The bodybuilder blamed the assault on roid rage, and though she did survive, she was left in a coma, and he was sentenced to 14 years. Imagine trusting a person with your child only to have this happen. This footage from Auckland, New Zealand, shows a masked woman breaking into an upscale home to steal the owner's 11-day-old baby. To make matters worse, this woman was working in tandem with the young child's nanny, who just so happened to be her cousin. Apparently, the kidnapper had been pretending to be pregnant for months, and even threw herself a fake baby shower, all for attention. This is one of those stories that gets weirder the more you look into it. On its face, it's clearly a person crashing their car into an office building. However, when you learn that the person was a driving instructor who was trying to kill his former partner, you start to wonder if the universe does have a sick sense of humor. Knife attacks are, unfortunately, all too common in places where guns aren't allowed. This particular footage comes from Ganzhou province in China. This was apparently a robbery attempt, as the location seen in the video is actually a bank. However, a 50-year-old security guard actually stepped in and was able to subdue the younger man with his bare hands. Well done. South American jails are notoriously not a place you ever want to end up. Still, this 14-year-old kid went above and beyond to escape from a Peruvian detention center that was, inexplicably, located in the center of a city. CCTV footage shows the young boy forcing himself through the fencing under the barbed wire. What's more incredible is that nobody outside or inside the facility seems to have taken notice. At least, not yet. This footage from China shows a man going to significant lengths to hide their identity while they rob the store. Specifically, they were using a combination of a beach umbrella and a large white sheet. The weird thing is that it totally works. They get off scot-free. Fortunately, the only things being stolen were about $1,000 worth of cigarettes. Guess you have to feed the habit. Here's another bizarre video from China, this time of a road rage incident that turned fatal in a very strange way. Surveillance footage shows a BMW trying to go into a bike-only lane to beat a red light. As the driver does so, they bounce up against the cyclist. Two people in their car first try to help, but the driver soon jumps out and attacks the poor man with a knife. The passengers try to hold him back, and the cyclist puts up a good fight against the crazed driver. The driver then returns with a machete, but in the midst of the attack, the cyclist was able to take it from him. In the end, the driver died from his wounds. One of the most difficult issues police officers face is dealing with people who appear to be much older than their mental state. This footage from Bristol, England, shows two officers encounter a disabled man with a mental age of 7. After the man fails to follow their orders and gets scared, the police end up using a taser on him. They were later forced to undergo retraining, and the man was mostly unharmed. There's a reason people are a lot less religious than they used to be, and part of it has to do with things like this. CCTV footage from Lynchburg, Virginia, shows mega church pastor Sergio Gardia breaking into the home of one of his parishioners. He's been accused of stalking the poor woman, and footage from inside shows him panicking the moment he finds the camera. Police later showed up to search the premises, but it seems the creepy pastor is long gone. Fortunately, he was later arrested. This footage comes to us from Chicago, where CCTV cameras have proved instrumental in helping police deal with the city's violent crime problem. In this case, the footage shows an aggravated battery involving a firearm. At first, it seems just like a few people hanging out in an alley. However, the two men soon make their way to a fenced-in area where they draw a weapon and fire it. Luckily, since this is just aggravated battery, the victim survived. Shoplifting has been repeatedly de-escalated as a crime due to most stores carrying insurance. However, that doesn't mean shop owners don't still get outraged when they see people blatantly stealing. That was the case in this video from Fresno, California. It shows several teens stealing multiple items from a store. When they try to flee, the attendant stands in their way to make sure they pay. However, after a few seconds, the teens decide to push past her. To her credit, she puts up a valiant effort against the three thieves, saving at least some of the merchandise. If you go home after a day of work to tell your husband or wife you almost got hit by a plane, it's safe to say you had an interesting day. But that's just what happened in this footage from Boca Raton, Florida. When a small passenger plane skidded off the runway and nearly took out a nearby runway worker. Talk about a close call. In 2019, there were a number of terrorist attacks launched across Sri Lanka. This footage shows the result of one such blast, which targeted the Kingsbury Hotel in Colombo. You can see this poor man walk into the building. Moments later, the force of the blast knocked the doors open, sending people running for their lives. Later footage seems to have captured the assailant, who can be seen getting out of a tuk-tuk and carrying a backpack to the hotel and checking in not long before the explosion. We've seen bad behavior by pizza customers, but how about this delivery driver? He decides to relieve himself in the elevator while he's on his way to deliver the customer's food. I know it's wrapped up and everything, but I wouldn't want to eat that. Sometimes you just want a tasty beverage. However, the middle of a robbery isn't exactly the best time to grab yourself a cola. However, that's just what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, when a man decided to rob a convenience store after he got himself a little refreshment. The moment the second customer leaves, he immediately pulls out a gun and demands that the cashier turn over the cash. It doesn't look like much, and he even drops a few bills. He then demands the change. He won't leave without that soda, though. Besides nannies, it seems that cleaners are also not to be trusted. Check out this footage from Essex in the UK. It shows a 44-year-old cleaner searching through various homes looking for loose money, lottery tickets, and jewelry, among other things. Apparently, this woman had dozens of clients all over town, and if it weren't for these CCTV cameras, she and her sticky fingers might have never been caught. This footage dates back to 2010, but it's still pretty wild, even by today's standards. It shows a crazy scene in London where a number of supposed gang members stormed into a local store and began pocketing everything they can get their hands on. These sorts of swarm robberies are popular in various parts of the world because the perpetrators know that there are too many of them for a single person to stop. A bunch of teens stealing isn't really that much of a shock. However, this guy doesn't look like your average thief. If you're unaware, that's a Buddhist monk, or at the very least, someone dressed like one. As a faith, Buddhism is 100% against stealing, so either this person isn't up on his reading, or he's wearing a costume.
So could you introduce yourself?
I'm Damon, and I live in London, and I go to university.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just tell me your full name then, Damon.
Damon Joseph Smith.
Damon, okay. And what's your date of birth?
November 23rd, 96.
Okay.
This might not look like much at first, but this UK teen is actually very sinister. He made a homemade bomb and planted it on a subway train in an attempt to cause widespread harm. Despite his nefarious intentions, he grinned and laughed throughout this entire interview. Though nobody was harmed, he was later sentenced to 15 years in jail.
I know you've already said that, but for people looking and listening, they know, because once I press the tapes on, things have happened and people are now listening to what's going on.
Yes.
All right?
Animal lovers, beware. This footage shows 73-year-old Margaret Worker throwing poisoned meat into her neighbor's backyard in an attempt to get their dog to eat it. Fortunately, the dog didn't actually eat any of it, but she was later charged with animal cruelty. Apparently, this all started because of the dog barking. Guess she never heard of knocking on a door and politely asking for some peace and quiet. Those of you who don't live in the United States are probably going to find this video quite shocking. It essentially shows a military-style gun battle happening on the south side of Chicago. CCTV footage shows a vehicle pulling into a BP gas station. One suspect goes inside, while the other follows behind a few paces. Once in the store, the first man, who has a large firearm tucked under his arm, looks around for a few minutes before returning to the car. He then pulls out the weapon, fires several shots, and drives off. As this has been ruled a homicide, the suspects clearly hit whoever they were looking for. Police in California recently released this footage of an older man they say tried to lure a 6-year-old girl into a supermarket restroom. The man apparently offered to give the girl a treat. Footage shows him lurking outside the bathroom, as if waiting for a potential victim. The good news is that the young girl was smart enough to decline, and the cops are now looking for the older creep. This violent attack from Birmingham, UK, became a big deal when it happened back in 2018. Footage shows the perpetrator putting on gloves before trying to enter a property he would later claim belonged to someone he knows. However, when he does make his way in, he immediately pulls a knife from his pocket. Inside, he would kill an 86-year-old grandmother and stab her grandson 15 times. Though he managed to escape through a garden, he was soon caught and sentenced to life in prison. Here is yet another unfortunate homicide from the mean streets of Chicago. This time, CCTV footage captures two suspects arriving in a parking lot in a blue car, which was curiously decorated with several flags. After a few moments, a woman exits the car and goes inside a nearby store. Shortly after, a second suspect enters and pulls a handgun. After committing the off-camera murder, the two drive off. Here is an alleged child abduction attempt that was thankfully caught on tape. This time, the incident occurred in a Philadelphia coffee shop. You can see a suspect stand up and take a few steps towards a baby in a stroller. He then leans down as if intending to kiss the baby. Judging from what we can see here, it's doubtful he was trying to actually abduct the child, but his behavior was creepy enough to warrant the reaction he got from the parents. Drunk driving is always a bad idea, and this footage is a big reminder of why. Keep your eyes on the background as this intoxicated driver hits an embankment so hard that it throws his vehicle into two gas pumps. The fact that the driver is able to simply walk away shows just how drunk they had to have been. Any sober person would have been seriously injured in such a crash. CCTV cameras all around the world capture insane footage virtually every time it storms. Unfortunately, not all of it will see the light of day. In this case, we got to see what happened when a falling power pole hit a car, causing some serious damage to the vehicle and to the road. Other footage from the same scene shows a cyclist and a pedestrian who almost suffered the same fate. This happened in Seattle, where storms are a common occurrence, but this was still far worse than normal. This footage is made all the more terrifying when you know the background. In this case, The men in the small blue car had carjacked, assaulted, and killed a woman in Stellenbosch, South Africa. The men chasing them are police, who pursued the men in both the stolen vehicle and on foot. They were later apprehended for the heinous crime, as were 2 other men who had participated in the attack. Here's another example of the swarm-style robberies that have gotten so popular over the years. As you can see from this CCTV footage, these types of events sometimes involve dozens of people, all of whom will enter a business and start breaking and stealing whatever they can. In this instance, the theft occurred during an unrelated public demonstration tied to the murder of George Floyd. This story has the makings of a really good TV movie. Footage from Kent in the UK shows a bookie being robbed by several armed men. The bet collector plays their part very well, acting terrified and going through the safe in order to get them as much money as possible. On the surface, it looks like a harrowing ordeal. However, the truth is that this young lady is 100% in on the crime. She was later arrested and jailed for 12 years once police found out about the scheme. Here's another terrifying video from the UK, and this one is real. It shows a 15-year-old girl being chased by a gang of men wielding baseball bats. After falling over while running away, she decides to hide behind a fence until the men disappear. It was a gamble, but it certainly paid off in her case. Fortunately, the gang of men was later captured. This video from Taiwan is pretty hard to sort out, but it's entertaining nonetheless. The person in this video is a disgruntled fireman who is attempting to rob the shop. At first, he sits down for a few moments, but upon noticing the CCTV cameras, he gives them a big wave, as if he's proud of what he's about to do. And what does he do? Well, he strips naked, of course. There's no telling why this man decided being nude would make the robbery easier. but he certainly shows no shame as he moves around the shop, moving and opening packages until he finds what he wants. He then gets dressed again and leaves. Truly bizarre piece of footage. This very Australian video shows a very Australian thief who stole, what else, but a crocodile. It seems Mr. Dundee has fallen on hard times and is now stealing reptiles from zoos. He also took a few snakes, though only a few moments of the crime spree were caught on camera. Of all the awful footage that we've seen today, this one might be one of the worst. The sheer audacity of this person to do this. The complete lack of care for a fellow human being who is just trying to do the job. With any luck, the video only cut off because the person carrying that tray got swift revenge. Here's another video that seems to start off completely normal. These men are bouncers at a club in Russia. However, somebody must not have liked their selection of vodka, because when the front door opens, the only thing that comes in are a few flaming Molotov cocktails. The fiery liquor quickly causes flames to engulf the area. Luckily, a quick-thinking employee grabs a fire extinguisher and puts the blaze out before it can spread any further. Back to Chicago for another scary shooting. Footage captured from a nearby CCTV camera captured this June 2020 murder. It shows a group of men arriving at a secluded parking lot. Eventually, they make their way to a nearby street, where they stop for several moments. Not long after, the men can be seen running at full speed and getting into a waiting vehicle, having just killed a 23-year-old victim. Samurai swords were great weapons at one point in history, namely the time of the samurai. This video from Essex shows what happened when a 50-year-old man unsheathed his fantasy sword and he used it to threaten two police officers. Since the UK has seen a lot of knife-related crime in recent years, the two officers immediately used non-lethal riot rounds to take the man down. When the police tell you to drop the knife, it's usually a good idea to do it. Here's more footage that appears to be perfectly innocent unless you know the background. These men, who seem to be having such a great time, are actually terrorists. Not long after they left this petrol station, they would launch an attack in a major tourist area, killing 13 people and injuring 130 others. It's rare that you get such high-quality footage of a person committing a crime, but this video from 2019 shows a man pulling off a brazen strong-arm robbery at a Go-Low gas station in Chicago. The man in the Cubs jersey was apparently accused of concealing an item with the intent to steal it. When confronted by the shopkeeper, he becomes instantly irate and strikes the man across the face. When the two suspects try to leave, they find the doors locked. After several moments, they decide to just start slamming and kicking at the glass door until it breaks. Given the clear footage of the man's face, it's hard to imagine he went long without being apprehended. Burglaries are, unfortunately, quite common. However, it's rare that they come dressed so casually. This surveillance camera footage shows a man wearing a bathrobe attempting to break into a nearby home through the kitchen window. Unfortunately for him, he manages to get stuck for almost a full minute. Then he notices the camera and decides to spend a few moments giving it a very good view of his face. Looking at the man's expression and attire, it's hard to argue that substances are involved here. Hopefully, the kids those toys belonged to weren't home when this went down. There's a reason why gas pumps make you pay before you can start filling up with gas. In what has later been described as a raid, these gangs of motorcycle riders rushed into a store and began grabbing items. Though some of them paid, others simply grabbed whatever they could and began throwing it out to their compatriots. Some of the motorcyclists stole gas as well. There appear to be dozens of them, but clearly not all of them were involved in the theft. The poor shopkeeper must have been very confused by the ordeal, which undoubtedly caused a lot of chaos. Here's even more gas station chaos, this time from Atlanta, Georgia. It shows a group of young men walking down a street in the middle of the day. When they reach the gas station, they appear to stop, as if looking for something. It turns out that what they're looking for is a victim. The young men eventually find a vulnerable person at the back of the gas station parking lot. They shoot the car owner and steal his car before racing off. The person later passed away, upgrading this from an armed carjacking to a murder. One of the assailants was arrested immediately, but others remain on the run. The murder of Karen Buckley in 2015 made headlines all over her native Scotland. After being offered a ride home, a 21-year-old man named Alexander Pechtel later killed her and attempted to dispose of her body with caustic materials. Surveillance video shows Pechtel shopping for chemicals to dissolve her body and dispose of the evidence. His attempts failed, and he was eventually caught and sentenced to life in prison. It's rare that you see bad behavior at a McDonald's that doesn't take place in the United States. In this case, the incident takes place in Santiago, Chile. Hoping for a late-night snack, this customer was told that he would have to wait for food. After getting into an altercation with staff, a security guard kicked him out. Angered, the man returned to the parking lot and began firing his gun into the air, all the while cursing and threatening to kill the McDonald's workers inside. He eventually left, but it's safe to bet those workers were terrified of what would happen if he made it back inside. This one is also pretty wild, not because it's violent, but because it's so needless. The footage from a local gym shows a man walking by a person working out and purposefully pretending to trip as an excuse to slam the man in the face with a 45-pound dumbbell. The victim requires 5 stitches and had a fracture in his face, while the man who faked his tripping was sentenced to 19 months in prison. Sadly, there was zero motivation for the attack. We all use escalators from time to time, but apparently, these motorized stairs can turn into death traps in a matter of seconds. That's what happened at a train station in the Philippines when an escalator failed, sending dozens of people sliding back down into one another. It might not seem like much, but 10 people were injured in this incident, mostly from having their friends, family members, and complete strangers land on top of them. Here's another wild incident that seems to have little to no motive. CCTV footage shows a blue Mercedes parked in the middle of a driveway in Hertfordshire, England. At some point, a man walks up, douses the luxury car in petrol, and then sets it alight before running away. After several moments, someone finally shows up with a fire extinguisher to put the fire out. However, had this fire been left to spread, it could have done a lot more damage. News reports blamed the incident on a random arsonist, which is frankly even scarier than being targeted by someone you know. Let's finish up with this terrifying footage from Warners Bay, Australia. It shows a man with bleached hair pulling out a large knife and threatening a convenience store worker, who runs away immediately. The man was later determined to be heavily intoxicated. Due to the threat he posed, police eventually had to open fire, killing him.